On February 11th, 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. After spending 27 years behind bars, it was a triumphant moment for anyone who was fighting against the current system. The following years were a struggle. However, despite everything, Nelson Mandela went on to become the President of South Africa and one of the most famous figures in the world. Finally, he passed away on December 5th, 2013, sending shockwaves through South Africa and the international community. However, while the string of events is accepted by most as the history, not everyone believes that this is exactly what happened. Instead, there is a different course of events, an alternative history, that millions of people around the world have started to believe. A theory that involves the murder of an influential figure and a larger conspiracy that has enveloped South Africa even today. Is Nelson Mandela a hero among people, or a device that was planted by a system that needed to act quickly in order to keep the control it already had? On August 5th, 1962, Nelson Mandela was arrested. 2 years later, on June 12th, 1964, he was sentenced to life in prison. He would go on to spend 27 years in prison, 18 of those years being spent on Robben Island. It's here that many people believe his life ended. According to popular belief, Nelson Mandela did spend his life in prison, but only because his life was cut short by an unknown figure. According to the story, one night, someone made their way into Nelson Mandela's cell and murdered him. From that moment on, a plan was officially set in motion. A plan to deceive almost 40 million people into believing that a hero was about to be released. A plan that ensures that the group controlling the system would continue to control the system. When Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, many Americans were shocked, not because of the release itself, not even because of the changes that would soon come to South Africa, but because, according to them, Nelson Mandela was already dead. According to many Americans at the time, a few years earlier, they had watched a televised broadcast of Nelson Mandela's funeral. A celebration of his life and the tragedy of his death was broadcast live to their televisions. So how could a man who was dead be released from prison? Many equate the situation to false memories, or remembering something that never happened. This situation would go on to spawn something called the Mandela effect, a phenomenon where a large group of people remember something differently than how it actually happened. This leaves us with a number of questions. The first and foremost being that if Nelson Mandela was murdered in prison, then who was released in his place? Well, there is an answer for that as well. According to the theory, instead of Nelson Mandela, Gibson Mkandla was released in his place. While there is currently no information on who exactly Gibson was before he was used to replace Nelson, it's commonly believed that that's by design. To use him as a replacement, all information recording him and his former life was wiped and erased. While Gibson Mkandla and Nelson Mandela look alike, it's claimed that there are subtle differences between them. This includes their facial structure, most notably the differences between their noses and ears, as well as their behavior and the inconsistency in statements given between the time Nelson Mandela spent in prison and the time he was allegedly released. So why would anyone go through all this trouble? If this was an elaborate cover-up, there would have to be a motive for it. There would have to be something that the powers in the darkness would gain from this. Before I go on, I make new videos every week, so if you like the video, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon to be notified as soon as I upload again. During the late 1980s, the government was quickly losing control of South Africans. People were protesting and fighting against the system more and more, and if they didn't do something quickly, the coming revolution would topple their system. It's believed that at this time, they partnered with various international groups and governments and came up with a plan. This plan would let the people win. They didn't need to stop the coming revolution. They would just have to make it look like the revolution had been won. This way, they would satiate the people, give up their roles in leadership of the country, but still keep control of both the power and wealth while remaining anonymous. History had taught them that you couldn't win a revolution against the people, but you could deceive large groups of people if you gave them exactly what they wanted. However, Nelson Mandela was a freedom fighter, a man who cared more about the people than himself. He couldn't be the one to help them keep power, so they trained Gibson Nkanda to take his place, offering him a position of wealth and fame, and even the Nobel Peace Prize. Once he was ready, they killed Nelson Mandela and then announced his release. This figure, metaphorically wearing Nelson Mandela's skin, would then go on to champion the people of South Africa as Mandela and later become president. However, whether he had any real power is still debated. Instead, he played the part of a helper, someone who was helping South Africans achieve freedom. This wasn't about race or culture or history. This was about control. The revolution would end and South Africa would no longer receive backlash from the international community. The money and the ownership would stay with the organization who always had it, and the people of South Africa would get what they wanted, but not what they needed. It's believed that this status quo continues even today, with the current government upholding both the lie and the system that was created in the 1990s. I have to make one thing very clear. This is a conspiracy theory, one that, when looked at in a vacuum, makes complete sense. However, life does not exist in a vacuum, and there are inconsistencies in the story, which is why I would like to actively encourage you to find your own truths and your own opinions. I am just a YouTuber, here to tell a story. My words should not be the sole reason for your beliefs. Instead, read the history, check the sources, and find your own answers. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. The Nelson Mandela conspiracy theory is an intriguing one, and shows us that there could possibly be deeper organizations controlling our fate. However, it is just a conspiracy theory, so think critically about it before accepting it as truth or lies. If you like the video, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon to be notified as soon as I upload again. Until then, this is Daniel Dark, signing out.